Welcome back, folks, to another great episode of Dr. J Radio Live. Of course, I'm your host, Dr. J, broadcasting from the City of Demons. I forgot, I purposely didn't say City of Angels because these days I would probably say we're closer to City of Demons. When I used to say City of Angels or City of Demons, most of you agreed that I should probably say City of Demons. Not to say there's not angelic people out here, because there's lots of love, but Tinseltown ain't what it used to be, folks. That's for darn sure. First of all, let me give a shout out to the fine people in YouTube Nation who have been waiting patiently. We have Lars Saturn, Pam Brettenberg, who is my moderator and social media manager. And also we have here Carmen Smith. Hello, Carmen. Now, we are broadcasting from 107.7 FM UPRN in New Orleans, Louisiana, as well as several affiliates around the world, including Hong Kong, Canada, all across North America, Mexico, UK, EU, you name it, folks, even down under in Australia, and iHeartMedia. And one of the networks that has followed me through multiple networks over the years is Deprogrammed Radio out of the United Kingdom. That's where it's based, and they do have terrestrial affiliates in London, Leeds, and wherever else they have in the UK and the EU. Now, today we have a very special show for you today. We're not going to be talking about aliens, demons, abductions. We'll talk about that stuff tomorrow night. Today we're going to talk about true crime, something you all would definitely be interested in, because this involves celebrity, this involves murder, this involves sex, and everything that really makes for a good movie. But it's sad because this is true, very true, folks. To give you a little quick hint, the person that had passed away is the guest's father. He was murdered, and he was a celebrity. He was the star of Hogan's Heroes. I'm going to let y'all folks hear it from yourselves, from the guest himself. So without further ado, let me introduce Mr. Robert David Crane. Bob, welcome to the show. The pleasure is all mine, and of course, all the people listening and all the fine people in the chat. Now, real quick, I just mentioned and sort of spoiled who your father was. Let's talk more about who he is, who he starred in Hogan's Heroes, and for those who may not know very much about Hogan's Heroes, talk about when it aired, if they're still airing it, reruns, I mean, and things like that. And who your father was to it, of course. That's the main thing. Now, let me ask. Well, yeah, well, why doesn't that work? I'm totally confused here. Now hold on. I'm getting some people here from listening on YouTube are telling me that they are not able to hear you. So let me get this figured out real quick, Bob, before we go on to the next question. Folks in YouTube Nation, hang tight while we do some quick literally on the fly repairing. And remember, folks, if you are, let me get some feedback here again, folks. Let me know. Anybody in YouTube, can you hear the guest now? Let's find out, folks. I'm waiting for you to tell me. Yes, the guest sound is at maximum, Pam. I see that. First time here. Hello, dezombified. We still can't hear the guest. Okay, let's try to troubleshoot this again. This normally does not work, but hey, this is technology, folks. It's very, very fickle and does not make any sense. Let me try one quick thing here for you and see if we can get this going straight for you folks, because obviously we want everybody to have the ability to hear what we're talking about. Because if you can't hear the guest and you could only hear me, well, that does not help you at all. All right, let's try this right here and let me know what you guys can hear now. Let's see, apply this, okay, and let's see, I see a double. Try again, Bob, and let me get some feedback from the people in chat.
Hi, testing 1, 2, 3 from Los Angeles, California. I am speaking.
Okay, folks, can you hear? Yes, he is talking. Can you hear, folks? I'm waiting for someone to give me some feedback. If not, I'm going to have to redirect you to another place. You still can't hear him. Okay, let me try one other thing. If not, folks, well, I'm going to have to tell you to go listen somewhere else. Try again, Bob. One more time.
Okay, here we are. Third time's the charm. Can you hear me, everybody? I'm on the Dr. J show. Hello. Hello.
Ladies and gentlemen, I see you're saying barely, which is better than nothing. Just very, very quiet as it picked up from my own mic. Okay, let's try one more thing. If not, like I said, I will have to unfortunately end this stream and just listen to it in the UPRN's YouTube. Again, folks, hey, welcome to modern day technology, modern day problems. All right, let's see what this does here. Let's try now, and let's see if any of these fine folks can hear something now. Say something again for me, Bob, dear friend. Okay, let's see. Folks, can you hear now? Can you actually hear? Yes, you can. Okay, good. Now they can hear you. We are all good, my friend. See, Bob, we figured this out while we are on air. This is great. Okay, now, folks, just...
That's why they call you Dr. J.
That's right. Hey, that's a good one. Now, folks, I'm going to show you this little true crime logo, and let me just show you the call-in numbers. If you do want to call in, folks, don't call the 818 number. Try the 504 number, or just leave your questions in chat. As you can tell, I've been monitoring it. I always monitor it. I may not have time to write something, but I absolutely am reading, because I'm very interested in what you guys and gals out there listening throughout the world, should I say, are in fact wanting to say, or are thinking, thoughts, questions, all of the above. Now, let's go dive in this a little deeper. What's it like to grow up with a celebrity as a father?
Well, it was everything good and bad that you can think of. I mean, the good part was doors open for small family from Connecticut, to get into places that my mom and dad had never been in before, restaurants and all sorts of things. For me, was my dad getting tickets to the Beatles that got me my friend Dave and we saw the Beatles in 1966. That's just because my dad. The bad part was Hogan's Heroes was such a big hit in the United States that we couldn't go anywhere. We used to, go out and get a hamburger or something at Dupar's in Studio City. We couldn't walk in there without people yelling, "Hey, Hogan, what's going on? Where's Schultz?" And so all of the anonymity that we had before as a just a regular family, I thought, was gone. My mom and dad come from Connecticut. I was born in Connecticut as well, but have spent most of my life in Los Angeles. So my mom and dad were used to, little small town Connecticut lifestyle. And my dad got a job in Los Angeles on the radio. So we moved, the three of us moved west. We were the pioneers in our family. And, Los Angeles is a huge place, and there's a lot of media, and it's the second largest market, as they say, and the United States behind New York.
As far as you mean entertainment, because as you're saying, New York is the number one. You mean, right?
Yeah, I'm talking about television stations and radio.
Yes. Now, globally, this was shocking to me, and I'm sure it's not too shocking for you, especially since you've been around longer. Mumbai, India, produces far more movies than Tinseltown does.
They do. Wow. Yeah. I can believe that, though. I can believe that. Yeah. And they do a lot of great the Bollywood stuff you're talking about, perhaps.
Absolutely. Yeah.
They do a lot of great films.
Now, you said your father got Beatles tickets. Were you able to go to that concert, you said?
Oh, yeah. My friend Dave Aronoff and I went and sat in the first row behind the visitors' dugout at Dodger Stadium, because back in those days, there was, before the big concert, the stadium tours took over like now, you didn't sit on the field. So the Beatles were on a stage on second base. So that's as close as we could get to them, being in the first row behind the visitors' dugout, looking out to second base, and that's where the Beatles were on stage.
I actually have here, we have David Diamond says, Dupars, exclamation point. Ask him about their three highs.
Absolutely. Dave Diamond is another longtime friend of mine. He and I have written together. We have, if I may put in a plug for a book called Hollywood Plateau, available at Amazon. Dave and I got to interview some people for We Magazine, and a couple of our pieces are in that book, Hollywood Plateau. Anyway, Dave and I used to go to Dupars in Studio City, the one I mentioned before with my family, and Dave and I would have the delicious three high, which is 3 pancakes and some crispy bacon and full cup of coffee. Dupars, though, is part of the old Los Angeles, the one that you may be referring to, Dr. J. Unlike what it is now, when there were some great neighborhood joints. And
Bob, did we lose you? Bob, you still there with us, buddy? I just heard you say some great neighborhood joints. Let's make sure he did not get dropped off this call. Wow, it looks like we are being suppressed tonight, folks. Let me reach out to the station owner here, Joe Montaldo, and say, what happened? What happened? What is going on, folks? Well, listen, in the meantime, until we get our guest back, let me tell you about this past Saturday. Since I promised you folks all last week that I would tell you about my own NDE, near-death experience, I did that video as well as explaining why all of us, why life flashes before your eyes. Let me text him right now and bring him back. So if that video is out, and several of you, including Lars, I believe Carmen was there, and several people, guest is unfortunately gone, and unfortunately I can't bring him in because I am not hosting this call. We need to get Joe back in here. Let's see here. Joe, we need you. We need you to bring us Bob back. Okay, folks, don't worry. It's not me that's gone. I am going to do something on my end. This is one of the unfortunate parts when you're not hosting the call, because it needs to go out to all the other networks, including iHeartMedia. Now, let's try again here. Let's see what happened to Bob here. Bob, if you can hear me at all, I see you are connected. I don't know why you're muted completely in any way. But I would suggest you hanging up and call that 504 number if you can. And Joe, if you're there, you know what, folks? You hang tight. I'm going to hang up and recall this, and let's see what happens here. And let's see if we can get this straight. Let's try to get everybody in. And let's see. Bob, are you back with us? Mr. Crane. Bob Crane. Hello, Bob. What about Joe Montaldo? No, guest is definitely gone, folks. This is such a bummer because the last thing I heard him say is I see you're connected, Bob, but for whatever reason, you are muted. I don't know why, and it's not coming from our end. The last thing I heard you say was that about a great joint. Okay, Joe, if you're listening to this, buddy, please bring back the guest. We need the guest back. Let me write him again. Talk about troubleshooting live on air, folks. This is exactly why I did everything hours ahead of today, including set up the schedule, including the images, including all of the above, folks. And sure enough, live on air, it happens. This is live radio. This is the difference from those who get to pre-record something or make something and then upload it later or air it later, like a pre-recorded segment. But as we're live, we have to take the good with the bad, and this is what happens. Come on, Joe, buddy. We need you to bring back our guest. Let me try calling Joe again and finding out what the heck is going on, folks. So, in the meantime, you guys just chat real quick here. You probably even hear me calling Joe as I'm doing this. Joe Montaldo, the station owner. Let's see here. Joe, where are you? Joe Montaldo. Come on, Joe. Joe. Let's see if Joe can get this phone because Joe is not around and we do not have our guest anymore. And if that happens, then we'd have to reschedule the guest. But hey, Joe, my friend, we lost our guest. Can you please bring him back? All right, we'll bring him on because all the YouTube chatters are waiting for this fine show. All right. Yeah, all you fine folks in YouTube Nation, thank you so much for being patient. And let me tell you one thing, even though I do because YouTube can only allow you to schedule something on the hour or at 30 minutes, technically the show usually starts about 9:05ish Eastern, but I put it at 9 instead of 9:30 because that way I can start chatting with you people, and that way we
you've
can get you all
reached
back.
Bertram in Crane.
Well, he is,
Please
but it
leave a
went
message.
to his voice message. We need to redial him one more time and bring him back. At least we got to hear him, folks, so now we're going to try him back because I believe he was trying to call us. And so, yeah, here, I'll put you on speaker, Joe, so the fine listeners can also hear, our trials and tribulations, which has never happened to this extent out of 7 years. It begs the question, what are they trying to shut off? That might be him real quick. Let me answer it. Hello? Yeah, he's trying to call you right now. Can you answer Joe's call?
Hi, you've reached Bertram.
You have another
in Crane.
number? What's the other number?
Leave a message.
Okay, I'll give it to Joe. Thanks. Okay, Joe, we have a new number for you to call him out. His phone has died. So, see, folks, this is not our technical problem this time. This technically is the guest. So, Joe, let me give you the number where he just called me from and said to call him at. It is the same area code as me, folks. So, this guest, like he said, he's in LA, and so am I. And what do you know? Yeah. In Skype, Joe, you be getting, you're going to love this, folks. I don't want to give the guest's number out on air, but he's got 666 in it, and I know that scares a lot of people off. You want to hear a little story while we grab the guest? I had a credit card. Oh, I just gave it to you in Skype, Joe. Yeah. It's in that the whole group chat. Okay. I would say it, but I'm afraid I don't want to read it and publicly mention it on air. All right. Anyhow, as you heard Bob Crane mention that there are several stations, this is the second city in the United States that has as much media as it does. That's a darn fact. I mean, I could literally throw a football and break the window of Premier Studios where Coast to Coast hosts. I could also do the same where Jimmy Church is at. There is a lot of people around here, and the cool thing is with technology, folks, is yes, you're back with us.
All right.
Okay, we're
What's
back.
going on?
All right, folks. Okay, let's make sure you all fine folks in the chat can hear him, since we did have to make some changes, and it wasn't some suppression. What this was, folks, was actually uh, a physical failure of this. So here we go. We got him. Oh, real quick, here's another question for you, Bob. I did hear you mention fine joint and then you got off, but that's okay because we've actually talked about some other stuff. Real quick, Dezombified says, what exactly is this show about? Tonight, we're talking about true crime. Tomorrow, we'll do paranormal and other stuff. You really should check out the website, Dezombified. Let's see here. We have Carmen Smith. I know you love hearing a good story, and that's what we're here to tell you. And it's a true story. And David Diamond says, what is your favorite? Ask him about favorite drummers. What are your favorite drummers, Bob?
Oh, favorite drummers. It's because of my father. It's Buddy Rich. These are people going back 30, 40, 50 years before most of your listeners were born. Buddy Rich and Rockwise. Oh, my God.
Lars, I would think, whatever his last name, from Metallica.
Oh, yeah. He's incredible drummer.
Yeah. He also is the sole
Ginger
reason
Baker,
Who'd you say, Ginger who?
Ginger Baker used to drum for Cream with Eric Clapton, and he's just a wild man.
Travis Barker, I have to say, is one of my current favorite drummers.
Is he? Yeah.
Now, back to, let me make sure we got all these fine people there's a lot of quiet people in this chat. This is great, and I believe we were able to get everything we got. So now we're going to go back, Bob, to your story. Now, Dezombified, this is essentially what what we are talking about. Our guest is not just an author, but his father, if you got in late, is Bob Crane, and was Bob Crane, who was the lead actor in Hogan's Heroes. And his father was sadly murdered, and that's basically what we're talking about. Dezombified, again, go to drjradiolive.com, drjradiolive.com, and you'll find all that out. Now, Bob, let's wind the clock back. I believe the year is... Okay, let's go even back further than that. You mentioned Beatles. What else? Did it feel very different knowing that wherever you'd go, paparazzi would be taking pictures of you and your father? Were people, say, when you were growing up and going to school, trying to befriend you just so they can get closer to your father? I mean, I would think that might have been the case. This is definitely what Jack Osbourne was telling me to, until he rose to his own fame.
Yeah, it's a very strange phenomenon. My longtime friends are, we mentioned Dave Arnoff, Dave Diamond, a co-author that I work with, Christopher Fryer. We've known each other forever, so we've been through the whole deal together. But, you don't always trust people approaching you, and you're kind of leery at first before you believe them and see that they're genuine. And I used to watch in junior high, or middle school as they say now, used to be junior high, Dick Van Dyke's sons went to our school.
Ooh.
And Dick Van Dyke was huge television star, and then he started doing movies. He was in Mary Poppins, and
They
you know,
still
all these
host New
films.
Year's. Isn't it New Year? I believe it's still named after him.
Which one?
New Year's Eve, don't they still have a party named after Dick Van Dyke?
I don't know. Where's that?
I mean, I think I see on ABC here in LA every year, even though he's passed away. I believe, I mean, I hope I'm not confusing it with somebody else, but I believe they still host the party, the New Year's Eve party in New York City, where the ball drops, and even though he's passed away, they still call it that. But anyhow, that's irrelevant. The fact is, you went to school with his children.
I think Dick Van Dyke's still with us.
Okay. So then I'm thinking of another person that, regardless, I'm thinking of somebody who used to hold the American Bandstand. Who was that, by the way?
Oh, Dick Clark.
Dick Clark. Yeah. That's the name. Okay, yeah. I totally apologize.
Yeah, Dick Clark was huge too. No, Dick Clark was huge too. But
that's the one.
No, Dick Van Dyke was the comedy star, and he's still alive. He's 92, I think, or something like that.
That's good health. I gotta say, to be alive at 92 in good health, because unfortunately we know a lot of fine people who have passed away way too early, including Jim Mars. He was fairly young, folks. So anybody who's got family in their 90s, tell them you love them every day, because you don't know how much longer. And the fact that they made it to the 90s is fantastic. Now, Bob, if you don't mind me asking, how old were you in 1978? And what were you doing, too? Were you in school still?
In 1978.
Yeah.
Yeah, the year my father was killed. Yes. I was 27, and I was writing for magazines, including We magazine, OUY, which was owned by Playboy.
Yes.
Yeah,
yes, I know that
it was
one.
French magazine, but Playboy bought the U.S. version of it. And I was interviewing people for We Magazine. I remember when I found out my father had been killed, I was transcribing an interview with Chevy Chase.
Ha! Yes, fantastic comedian actor.
Huge star, on Saturday Night Live, and did a ton of movies after that.
The Vacation series and all those. And before we got on air, you were even talking that you wrote for Playboy, too.
Yes, I did. Yeah, I got to write for them for 20 years.
Now, let me ask you this. Oh, let me just throw this out there, too. My social media manager, Pam Brettenberg, does also say we do have a new group on Facebook, folks. So make sure you go into the YouTube chat of our YouTube chat, Dr. J Radio Live chat, as opposed to the UPRN, to find that link if you guys want to join that group. Now, you were 27. You were writing for We Magazine. What month, what day, and tell us the circumstances that led up to your father's death.
Well, his actual murder date was June 29th, 1978. And it happened to be two days after my birthday. And that was the last time I talked to him. He had called to, wish me a happy birthday. I was in Los Angeles. He was in Scottsdale, Arizona, doing a play. There used to be a thing called dinner theater, and he was doing a dinner theater play in Scottsdale called Beginner's Luck. And so he was going to be there a couple more weeks. And a so-called friend of his, John Carpenter, not the film director, but the Sony video equipment salesperson, was visiting him during that time, and they were friends, but they had some rough spots, and apparently there was a big argument that night in Scottsdale. I wasn't there, but that's what I've heard. And my dad was basically saying he was kind of tired of hangers-on and that kind of thing, and their friendship kind of ran out of gas. And the next morning, or next day, a person in his play found his body.
Now, what was the manner of this homicide?
bludgeoned 2 blows to the head.
By an object, I'm assuming, not by a fist?
Yeah, by an object, which they think was one of his tripods from a camera tripod.
That's a horrific way to go. I'm sorry, deeply sorry, Bob. Now, how long after the last time he was seen up until the time he was found dead?
Last time he was seen was at a club in Scottsdale that he went to with the John Carpenter, who I referred to.
Yes, Carpenter's
and that was
a great guy.
That was probably 2 or 3 in the morning, and then his body was found at approximately 2 o'clock the next afternoon.
So essentially 12 hours.
Yes, yeah.
And were the police able to identify who was with him, or who was the last person was that literally the last who had seen him in those 12 hours? That other than that, it's missing time is still unsolved.
Well, they think it might have been John Carpenter was the last person who saw him. No one knows for sure. But the person who found him was a woman who was an actress, Victoria Berry, who was in the play that he was doing. And she came over to his place. It was around 2 o'clock the next afternoon and found his body and then called the police.
Now, this was inside the house or outside?
This was inside an apartment in Scottsdale.
Did the apartment in Scottsdale, did it have signs of being broken into? Basically what I'm getting at, Bob, is did it look like your father may have known his killer by opening the door and allowing him in, or was this somebody or some people who broke in, maybe picked a lock, broke a window, and got themselves in there to commit this horrific act?
No. The former must have been someone that he knew because there was no break-in. The door, let's see, when Victoria Berry found him the next day, the front door was unlocked.
Ooh,
and
okay.
There was nothing, the place wasn't trashed or anything like that. There were a couple of things missing, the tripod.
Because that was that was the murder weapon.
Yeah, the police determined from photos of the apartment that were taken, before by my dad or for whatever reason while he was there. They saw the equipment that was there. This was back in the days of home video, and cameras and that kind of stuff. So they determined that the tripod was gone and a missing book of photographs of women.
Ooh, okay. Here's the sad thing, and this is really unfortunate, especially when a spouse of someone is killed. Police always look to the living spouse as a possible suspect. I'm assuming, and correct me if I'm wrong, Bob, did they bring in John Carpenter for questioning because he was the last person that saw him? And if so, did they start to treat him as a possible suspect until they were able to clear him?
Yes, they treated him as a suspect from day one.
That's sad. How long did that last till they cleared him?
Well, that was 1978. He didn't go to trial until 1994.
So they literally charged him with murder, John Carpenter?
Yeah, but it took 16
years
to get to trial.
Jeez, wow. And obviously he was acquitted.
And then, the trial took about, I think it was 4 to 6 weeks. It was pretty fast. And prosecution just didn't have enough to back it up. And the jury acquitted him.
Now, over those 16 years and during the actual trial, can you relay some of the... Because I hesitate to say the word facts, especially as someone who's worked in the law field. It more of a theory. What was the prosecution's theory that famed movie maker John Carpenter, friend of your father, was in fact
No,
a
he's not the movie maker. Not the movie maker.
Oh, okay. So that's who I was thinking. I was
No.
thinking John Carpenter's
No,
Vampires.
he's not the director. Not the director.
Gotcha.
The person who was a Sony home video salesperson.
Gotcha. Now, what was the prosecution's theory of why it would have been him?
Well, he was, from eyewitness accounts, he was the last person to see my dad that night. Again, they were at this nightclub, and there seemed to be an argument going on between them, and they knew that Carpenter was in town visiting my dad, as he would often visit him on the road, just to come in and, ostensibly on a business trip, but to have fun, to hang out with a celeb and party and all that stuff. So the police went for him immediately and stuck with him the whole time. The other person I talked to the police about was my stepmom, who was in the course of a divorce from my dad at the time. And she was the one who gained anything financially from the murder. She gained it, not Carpenter.
So
Carpenter
I'm assuming they probably looked at her as well.
Well, I don't know. I don't know how much they did, but she had come into town 10 days earlier with their son, Scotty Crane, and for Father's Day. And it seemed to be a kind of a weird thing because they're in the middle of a really ugly divorce proceeding, and to have her show up kind of unannounced at his apartment in Scottsdale was bizarre, to say the least. So again, I don't know how much the police looked into her. I will say this: she was the only one who gained anything financially. No one else did, including me or anybody from the first family. And John Carpenter certainly didn't gain anything. He lost his so-called friend. So
that's actually really sad. And then for 16 years to be tormented by the police and ultimately have to pay a big hunk of change for defense attorneys to get him out of this mess when he was innocent. I could just imagine.
Well,
I can't even imagine the toll it would take on him emotionally.
Yeah, no, he had a public defender. He could not afford, Robert Shapiro.
Well, at least the public defender did a darn good job, even though the prosecution's case was weak. Because when I was in law school, any public defender, it was, of course, there's great public defenders. I mean, some of the most fantastic attorneys in criminal defense I know are in the public defender's office. But that's not really what people primarily choose to do. If they want to do public service, usually they want to work for the DA or the CA, city attorney, unless they go to one of these top firms doing insurance law or something like that. But when it comes to criminal law, you don't hear very many people popping out of law school saying they're going to go into the public defender side. Now, I have seen people go from public defender to district attorney and then back to private practice as criminal defense, but usually the reason why people go to the district attorney's office is because you want to know what the prosecution does. That way, when you go into private practice, because prosecutors, folks, if you don't know this, obviously, they are always for the state or the federal government if it's a U.S. attorney. So if you want to know what they're doing, you have to work for the state. And when you go into private practice, you can't be a private prosecutor. It doesn't exist. You could only be into private criminal defense. So that is why the logic of most people. So at least he was able to get off with his public defender. Now, let me ask you, Bob, about your own theories. First of all, we're approaching 41 years after this happened, and I just can imagine how much of a toll this has taken upon you and your family.
Well, my family doesn't even talk about it. So we we've never had the how do they say, the kumbaya gathering, and we've never done that. So we all travel in different circles, and we connect occasionally for birthdays and holidays and stuff. But we never talk about my dad. So that was kind of rough, because I wanted to talk to somebody about this, and that's why I wound up writing a book with Chris Fryer. It's called Crane, Sex, Celebrity, and My Father's Unsolved Murder, where we go through the whole thing and what it was like, what you and I are talking about, because it became kind of a therapeutic deal for me, being able to go through all of this and put it on page.
Absolutely. I would think so, because you're able to vent your emotions and literally put them out on paper. And if you don't have anyone to talk to, I mean, that could tear up your head.
Yes, absolutely.
Now, if your family is not talking, but you are you still checking in here and there with the Scottsdale Police Department to see if there's any leads, even though it's 41 years later? Because Natalie Wood, I don't recall what year she was murdered, but it was in that same era. Even recently, they're still talking about that and then reopening that case.
Oh, yeah. Who's that?
Christopher Walken.
Yeah. Dr. Phil did a big piece on the Natalie Wood case last year, where they basically named Robert Wagner as the murderer.
Yes. But he wasn't charged yet, if I'm not mistaken, right? Or was he?
No, never been charged. No.
See, the thing is if you were participating in a homicide in that era, as opposed to now, where everybody has a phone or camera in their pocket, and there's so much surveillance out there as opposed to what there was then, I would think these days trying to get away with murder would be pretty darn hard. But then it would be easier. Now, I would assume that even though the tripod was taken, were they able to get any fingerprints? If not fingerprints, anything that could have been stored then for testing of DNA now? Because as you know, through the progression, after they started using DNA from testing from blood, then it became literally what they call touch DNA. If you just touch a surface, even though you're not leaving a fingerprint, your DNA is left there because of your skin constantly shedding its cells. Even though you can't really see it, you're constantly shedding your DNA wherever you are. And I think the advances in that have made it so much further. That way they can... Every department has cold case files. And I would think that they would have stored what he wore, possibly, things like that. Have you been able to see the evidence of, or what was left over?
Well, I was able to see some of it because a reporter in Phoenix, a guy named John Hook, who's a anchor and reporter at Fox News in Phoenix, actually got permission from the DA's office to go through all the files and the boxes upon boxes of materials and blood samples that, some are, I mean, they're down to the last drop, no pun intended, but there are no comedy meant. But I got to see some of that through John Hook, and he actually wrote a book, Who Killed Bob Crane? It came out a couple of years ago about this very thing, and he came down to, from what they found, there were blood samples on John Carpenter's rental car.
Ooh.
And two different samples, and one they could say could be my dad, could, underlined, and the other one was some person I've never heard of who, worked at the car lot or something like that. It just had nothing to do with it.
Were they able to say that those two blood samples occurred at the same time, or are they saying there's a gap of time between the two?
they can't. I don't think they can say conclusively, time wise. But needless to say, the blood samples have become pretty worn out and used and dissipated and all of that. So it's the bare bones. So to answer your question, long answer short, it's just really through seeing what John Hook came up with a couple of years ago, and that's really about it for the case now. I mean, this is boxes of photographs and dried up samples and paperwork, and I guess it's still technically an open case. It's a cold case, but to answer your question, I don't talk to the Scottsdale Police Department or the Maricopa County DA's office anymore. It's just one of those cases that will never be solved, and people are dying off. John Carpenter died. Patty, my stepmother, died. So
Victoria,
key witnesses are
the one that found.
I don't know. I think Victoria's still alive. Hope she is. But a lot of these people are passing away, so it's just not helping the case. And as you said, it's coming up on
41 years. Yeah. But the reason why I want to say, of course, you being the son, absolutely want to have that hope. And the reason why I say we have to have hope in these things is because the Black Dahlia, that's still an open case today.
Yeah, absolutely.
Bugsy Siegel,
Yep.
Mickey Cohen, the not Christopher Reeve. Who was his father? That was the original Superman.
George Reeves.
Yes, even that's still open. So just like you said, you saw those boxes of evidence. They have boxes of those evidence waiting for, I believe, either the technology, maybe someone who's passed, and they could exhume that body and get the DNA to check, so on and so forth. I truly think that you have to have hope, especially when you see television shows like Cold Case Files, and you find a case that something happened in the late 60s or 72 that was just solved in 2018 or something like that.
Right.
So I definitely would think, there is somebody I definitely need to introduce you to. This is going to stray off the topic real quick. I don't know how much you are into paranormal or not, but a good friend of mine who's also a guest on the show, which all you fine folks will get to hear soon, Robbie Thomas. He is a psychic criminal profiler. He literally sees dead people in the states of where they're murdered. He has testimony from FBI, every police department in the nation, in Canada, even in the UK, that say that he has been able to solve more cold case files or more murders than anything else. And they say that there's no better piece of technology close to Robbie. The closest thing would be a dog. And,
Right.
a dog is only limited. So at some point after this, I'd love to introduce you to Robbie to possibly go to the scene and see what he could see. Even though it had happened decades ago, he might still able
Yep.
to envision what exactly took place. But that's something we'll chat
Sure.
at after. Now, let me ask you this, Bob. What are your own thoughts of first motive and what exactly happened?
Well, motive for me has always been with two people. It was always with John Carpenter because he was there during that time span. My dad had told me that my dad told me that John Carpenter was becoming, a pain, kind of becoming like a hanger-on. It wasn't fun anymore. He used to be kind of a party guy, and they went to parties together and all that stuff, and that was becoming old. So he had the means and opportunity, but the motivation was always for Patty, my stepmother again, who my dad was in the middle of a divorce with. because no one gained anything from this. Carpenter lost his buddy,
Yes.
and Patty, my stepmom, gained control of the estate, which, it was not enormous. It wasn't any huge multi-million-dollar thing, but it was very comfortable for 1978, and no more divorce proceeding because her husband was dead. So those have been the two main people.
We have some questions here in chat. Let me go back. So I'm going to start with the very first ones here. Carmen Smith, I am going to ask you for your question about what he was filming. Who are you talking? So if you could rewrite that question, of course, I'll ask. We have another question here from Carmen Smith. Has he ever done any of his own investigating, meaning you, Bob?
Yes. I mean, I talked to the DA's office, the people that were running it at the time, back in the late 70s through 80s into early 90s. I talked with the prosecution, Bob Schutt, who took over the prosecution case against Carpenter in the early 90s. I talked to a couple, the first two detectives from Scottsdale Police Department who were on scene the day of the murder. And they're all in the book I keep referring to. I'm doing a cheap publicity thing for it, but it's called Crane, Sex, Celebrity, and My Father's Unsolved Murder. And it's about celebritydom. It's about my dad. It's about our family, and it's about the murder, which affected all of us. So, yes, I did speak to many of these people behind the scenes, and got a lot of information, saw a lot of paperwork, a lot of transcripts, including my own. I was interviewed a number of times by the DA's office and by the Scottsdale Police Department. My stepdad, Chuck Sloan, was with me along the way on many of these things, and he talked to people. And so, yeah, I got all this information together. So the book is kind of it's a Hollywood tale, but it's also, with the murder investigation in the background.
Now, we have Third Phase of Moon, which is one of the largest UFO YouTube channels with over 700,000 subscribers. Great friends of mine, and I've been involved with them since 2012. There's a comment real quick. Rockefeller Jr. is still missing, and Bob, I did mention this quickly, but this is their question. Ask him about the Black Dahlia.
I am the wrong person to ask about that. I've seen a couple of movies about it, as we all have, and I see occasional, documentary pieces about the case, but I am not sharp on the specifics, or, I'm not the right person to ask about the Black Dahlia.
Now, and for you fine folks who are interested, especially Third Phase of Moon, who want to know about Black Dahlia, there is somebody who has contacted us that is one of the people still alive that is really investigating the Black Dahlia case, and that person will join us at some point in time. But staying on this topic tonight, Bob, here is another question. This comes from Lars Saturn. It says, what does he think about I Am the Night series?
I Am the Night. I Am the Night. Oh, yeah, Chris Pine. I didn't see it. I want to see it, and I'll catch up with it at some point. But I like Chris Pine, and I like the filmmaker Patty Jenkins, I think, made the limited series. Who's a very good filmmaker. So I will catch up with it at some point. But it looked interesting.
For all you fine folks in the chat, when you got more questions, of course, I will ask. In the meantime, I'm just going to stay on my path. And Bob, forgive me as we veer off to, because the way I look at it is when a listener has a question, or a viewer, if we're on YouTube, meaning, I give them precedent. They take first place because this show really is for them. Now, back to what you said, your stepdad came along with you a lot of times to talk to the DA's office and the police department in Scottsdale. When was the last time you actually spoke to them about your father's murder?
Oh, wow. I probably talked to, let's see. The last time I saw, I think it was Detective Borkenhagen from Scottsdale Police Department. I saw him at a Barnes and Noble in Scottsdale. Excuse me, hairball. Let me just get a sip here.
No problem.
I saw him at a Barnes and Noble in Scottsdale in 2015, and he saw that I was, doing a little talk about the book. So he showed up, and we had a chat about the case. And he is now retired, but is, still stays on top of the case naturally, since it was a big one in, the Phoenix, Scottsdale area. And there is, according to him, there was nothing new at that time, and that was spring 2015.
Almost 4 years ago.
Almost 4 years ago. And then since I mentioned to you too, John Hook, the reporter from Fox Phoenix, his book came out 2017, so he might be a little bit more updated just on going through all of the boxes. I mean, I don't know how many boxes there were, 50 boxes of transcripts and photos and blood samples and all of that. So, he wrote that up in a book. And as I told you earlier, his main conclusion was the 2 blood samples on John Carpenter's car. And the best he could do was say one of them could be my dad.
Now,
what they didn't, this was before DNA testing, unfortunately.
Do you mean touch DNA or before any DNA testing?
Before any DNA, yeah, back in 1978. So they determined that the blood type found on Carpenter's car, way back then, they determined that it was my dad's blood type, but they could not specifically say that it was my dad's blood.
Let me see if I see more people writing in the chat. Okay. Dezombified. Ask him what he thinks about Hollywood's connection to sexual predators like Kevin Spacey.
Yeah, we're in a whole different age now.
Yes. Weinstein. Cosby.
Weinstein, Cosby, Bryan Singer allegedly, the director, on and on and on. Charlie Rose, you can make a whole list of people.
There is. I think it's over 100 now.
Yeah. Yeah, it's I'm all for it. It should not be happening. Unfortunately, a lot of these people with power and money and, their name is on the title of the show or whatever, they feel they can do anything, and you can't. You just can't do that anymore, not in today's world.
Definitely not in today's world. They got away with it in the 60s and 70s when it was, I hate to say, sort of accepted, but there really wasn't much respect for the woman at that time. A lot of women feared even talking about it.
Yeah.
So even Bill Clinton, one of the women that she says raped him when he was governor of Arkansas, she was quiet literally up until Trump was running for president. And then she came out only because of Hillary's statement that anybody who has been a victim deserves the time of day to be heard. And that's when she came out. Her name is Juanita Broderick. The point is, Bob, the only reason I'm saying this is because times have changed dramatically to the point where people, ladies who once feared, are now openly telling their stories, and justice is finally coming around. Now, you mentioned your father told you that John Carpenter was starting to be, getting to be to pain and other things like that.
Yeah.
Did your father ever say that John Carpenter was in fact acting violent towards him? I mean, was he known to go get in drunk violent rages at all, or fighting or anything like that?
Nothing towards my dad, but my dad had mentioned that John Carpenter had a bad temper and had been violent with a couple of his girlfriends. He was married, but he had girlfriends, and I guess there were a couple of cases of I guess you would call it domestic abuse kind of thing, where he did become physical with a couple of women that he had known, but never any physical violence towards my dad. No.
Do you believe that this was a crime of passion, meaning second degree, where they were just hanging out? Or do you think in your heart of hearts that this was premeditated to its full extent, that the perpetrator, if it was John Carpenter, had come to your father's house with the intent saying, I am not leaving until he is dead?
Yeah, no, I think it was a crime of passion for a couple of reasons. Number one is this argument I keep hearing about from different eyewitnesses, and the Scottsdale Police Department told me about it, that happened at that club that I keep referring to, the night of the murder. And that was about 2 or 3 in the morning at some nightclub in Scottsdale. They had a loud argument, according to eyewitnesses. That's one. Number two, yes, John Carpenter was there at the time. He had been in for a couple of days visiting my dad, and he was there physically. Number three, I think it was a crime of passion. If you're going to make the John Carpenter argument, again, not the film director, but the Sony home video salesperson, the argument being, I think the argument that night at that club might have been what my dad had told me about moving on, losing, people like Carpenter in his life, hangers on, whatever you want to call them, and moving forward with my dad's life, getting a divorce from his second wife, and looking ahead to life at 50. He was only 2 weeks shy of 50. And I think he told John, the moves that he wanted to make, and that included probably not partying on the road anymore with John Carpenter. And John, I'm just theorizing, might have taken that as a rejection, like a lover's spat, as a rejection, and came back and thought he'd even the score. And and the fourth thing, crime of passion, because it wasn't a gunshot. It wasn't clean. Some people said, was it a mob hit or something? No, a mob hit would be a gun, very clean, walk away. This is very sloppy. This is they theorize a tripod, which is a heavy metal instrument, going down twice on the side of my dad's head, producing blood spatter all over the room. I saw the room. I went to the apartment. I went to the murder site, and there's spatter on the walls. There's tissue, human tissue on the wall. I saw it.
So
it was a very
father's
sloppy
tissue
kill.
Was on the wall from the blows he received?
That's the only thing I can imagine, yeah.
Jeez. Before I continue with this, Bob, we have another question which is going to derail what we're talking about, but this has to do with you. This is from John Cerny. I hope I pronounced that properly. It says, can Bob talk about the death of John Candy, who he worked with at the time?
Oh, my God. Yeah. Today, Dr. J, today is March 4th, 25 years since John Candy died. Wow. The great actor, comedian, comedy actor, Second City, Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. People who know the name John Candy will know what he did.
Oh, he was a fantastic guy. Spaceballs, even.
Spaceballs, absolutely. I had the pleasure of meeting him in 1981 and interviewing him along with the SCTV crew. They were the late night comedy show for Playboy. So that's how I met John Candy. And so I interviewed him half a dozen times over the years for different magazines and newspapers. And then he eventually asked me to go to work for him as his publicist, which was, because I had been on the other side with the scribes out there. So now I was on his side, and I went to work for him, and I worked about 6 years with him until he died of a heart attack in 1994. And what an experience. I mean, what a sweet, great guy.
Down to earth, he would, not egotistical.
Absolutely. I mean, what you think he was by seeing him on screen, he was. He was, absolutely. I mean, just a sweetheart of a guy, and he's got a great family. He's got his wife, Rose, is wonderful, wonderful artist, and his two children, Jennifer and Christopher, are both actors, and they're doing well. They're working in L.A. They're, working on TV shows and stage and stuff like that, and they've just come through. I'm so happy for all of them, and but so many people miss John, and it's funny, you and I are talking today, but it's March 4th, 1994 that he passed away.
I can't believe it's been 25 years, honestly. I mean, to me, it seems like maybe a decade or so ago, and he will live on forever. Like you mentioned, some of these movies are classics that will never, ever... No actor can make... I don't think there will ever be a remake of Planes, Trains, and Automobiles or Spaceballs with new actors that can play John Candy's role the way he did.
Well, I hope not. They did try Uncle Buck.
Someone wrote
TV.
That. Uncle Buck, Yeah,
but it just didn't work.
Now, back to your father. Before I go more into the scene, which was clearly gruesome, in particularly, you mentioned the side of his head is where he got hit. Were they two things? A couple questions are going to spawn from this. One, were they able to identify how many blows he received from this tripod, if in fact it was a tripod, considering it had been taken? I mean, if you're going to commit a murder, right? I'm not encouraging anyone, of course, to do it, but if you are, you're going to take the murder weapon with you. Why would you leave it? That's evidence. That's going to...
Exactly.
That's going to link you up. Now, did it look like it was a sucker's hit, meaning that was your father looking away, or... I mean, again, just theorizing, because this is still an open case, or do you think it was something that they were hanging out, the fight escalated, facing each other, and one grabbed the tripod and started attacking your father?
No, to your first question first, it was two blows.
Two.
There were two cuts, two gashes to the side of his head, and he was asleep. He had gone to sleep.
Oh, he was asleep, and then he was killed.
He was asleep.
Jeez.
Yeah, he was found in his bed, lying on his side, with the two gashes in the head. So, the person that was there, let's say John Carpenter had, dropped by after this nightclub deal and was hanging out, and my dad goes to bed. My dad would have felt comfortable with somebody he knew, obviously, like Carpenter or, if it was Patty or whoever it was. He had to feel comfortable enough to go to bed. So that's why it wasn't a break-in. It was somebody there that he knew well to be able to go to bed and go to sleep.
Have you ever thought the possibility that, is it conclusive that he was asleep, or was it possibly that he was murdered and placed in the bed?
No, it's pretty conclusive that he was murdered in bed because of the blood spatter and the way the blood drained out in his head onto the bed. He was there. He was not moved.
Now, if it was Patty and Carpenter, and since they had motive, and they both were involved, then that opens a whole door to conspiracy.
Yeah, yeah. From what, it's very interesting. But from what I know, they were not fond of each other, Patty and John Carpenter. I mean, John took my dad's side during the divorce proceeding, as your quote unquote friend would do. And I don't think Patty had any great love or like for John Carpenter. I think she saw him for basically what he was, kind of a party guy, hanger-on, hang out with the celeb, that kind of thing. So unless they fooled everybody, I don't think there was any major connection between the two of them.
So after your father passed away, did you... let me ask you this. Up until Carpenter was in fact arrested and then tried, what was his moods like to you? I mean, did you ever run into him, or did you have a private investigator following him? What sort of actions did he start to act after your father's death as opposed to, say, the year or 6 months before?
Well, I spoke to him exactly 2 times on the phone after the murder. And one of the telephone conversations, I taped both of them. One of them I screwed up totally and I taped over it like an idiot, so I don't have that transcript. But the other one, I do have the transcript from the phone conversation, the last one I had with Carpenter, which is in this book I keep mentioning, Crane, Sex, Celebrity, and My Father's Unsolved Murder. I've got the verbatim transcript in there. And, I'm playing it up like I'm trying to be his buddy and I'm on his side. And, John, gee, I can't imagine what it's like, the police centering on you and, they're so wrong. And, I'm kind of a weasel. I'm kissing his ass just because I was trying to get information out of him. And of course he, thought the police had just went for him immediately and never looked at anybody else, which, in his defense, I think was true. I don't know how seriously they ever looked at anybody else. But after that second phone conversation with him, I tried to call him a third time just to try to get an update and get the other information I could, and he wouldn't answer the phone. I never talked to him again. The next time I saw him was 16 years later in the courtroom when I took the stand at my dad's trial, and I looked out into the audience, and there was John Carpenter sitting at the table with his defense attorney, and that was it.
Did he make eye contact? I'm assuming he would have at some point, or was he looking away from you?
He looked at me briefly. He gave me kind of an Injun Joe look from Tom Sawyer, and then he looked away and didn't look at me again.
Now, a lot can be told by looking at people's micro expressions. I mean, whether they are nervous and tapping their feet or making weird movements with their mouth or whatever it be, touching papers and stuff like that. Did he act that way when you were on the stand versus anybody else, or was this demeanor the same way throughout the entire trial of being nervous that he's going to be convicted and spend the rest of his life in prison?
Yeah, he was very nervous. Based on the time I saw him in the courtroom, and I've seen some other footage of him. Of course, he, is in complete denial about everything. And his wife, he did have a wife of record, Diana, who lashed out at the police and how could they do this and, all that kind of standard stuff. So they did play the victim card pretty well. How could it be me? And, all of that. And, but unfortunately, the prosecution, they just had sketchy information. They had eyewitnesses to arguments and things like that. They had the the couple of blood samples, which, from Carpenter's rental car, which they couldn't conclusively link to my dad. Again, like I said earlier, it was my dad's blood type, but they couldn't conclusively say it was his blood because this was pre-DNA. This is back in the late 70s, 80s, before Cellmark came into fame, with the OJ trial in 1994, and made DNA testing what it is today. This is all before that.
We're going to veer off real quick, and I'm going to come right back to this, Bob, because back to the listeners. Janet L. Spiegel's got 2 questions for you. Ask Mr. Crane who he interviewed for Hollywood Plateau.
Oh, my God. Wow, where do I start? Let me get a copy of the book. Okay, I'll read a few names for you. How about Rachel Weisz, Ashley Judd, Jimmy Kimmel, Roseanne,
nice.
Joan Rivers, John Candy, Joan Jett, Spinal Tap, Coco the American Signing Gorilla, Tracy Lords, who started out in porno. Yeah, but she became a very good actress. Jamie Foxx, Mark Hamill, Ben Stiller, Mariska Hargitay, the late Phil Hartman, hilarious, Nelly, Ruben Blades, Jack Nicholson, DJ Hall, Oscar de la Hoya, Don Steele, the former studio executive, Paul Schrader, who did the film about my dad, Autofocus. Frank Sinatra, I do a posthumous interview with Frank. John Cerny, who called you earlier, another fabulous artist. Cheech and Chong did with Dave Diamond, Paul Gasol, Lucy Liu, Sarah Moulton.
Oh, so you know this John Cerny that was asking questions here?
I did. To be honest.
Interesting. Now that's a huge array, and that covers from sports to entertainment to comedy. You really, really have some fascinating connections. Now, Janet L. Spiegel asks another question, which is more short. She asks, ask your guest who was his favorite interview for Playboy magazine.
Janet Spiegel. She's incredible. I've known Janet, I have to be honest, too. I've known her since We magazine. My favorite interview of all time was Coco, the American sign language gorilla, who you remember from the 80s. Coco had the little kitten, cradling the kitten like a little baby. And Penny Patterson had a study where she was teaching Coco the English language and would sign it to her. And Coco knew, Coco was a lowland gorilla when I met her, I think in her teens back in the 80s. She died last year, I think in her 40s. But Coco knew about 600 words at the time. So I would ask a question to Penny Patterson, who was running the program. Penny would sign it to Coco. Coco would think about it, sign back an answer to Penny, who would tell me. It was just amazing, amazing day.
Let me piggyback off her question before I come back to this trial, because I have quite a few things I want to ask you about that. What are you still doing today? I know you've written 10 books, and I'm assuming you're still you're not working with Playboy anymore, right?
I'm not. No, my last interview was, in fact, a woman I saw the other night, a great actress named Jolene Blaylock. She was the last interview I did for Playboy in 2005. And they got a whole new regime in, and you know how it goes. There's
Ever since
any club,
And then remember when they changed from nudity to non-nudity, and then the sales really slumped, and then they switched back. I mean, obviously, he was probably pissed off, I would imagine.
Yeah, I was there at a wonderful time. I was there from 81 to 2005, and a great editor named John Rezick, who I worked with, or worked for, actually. And it was the heyday of Playboy, when they had a who's who of people interviewed in the magazine, besides all those wonderful photos.
And now, I know we talked about this off air that the Playboy Mansion is definitely not what it used to be, but
No.
approximately how many times and over approximately how many years have you been at the mansion? Maybe like
I
time
only went to
frame.
I went to the mansion exactly twice. One time with Janet Spiegel, who just wrote to you, because she worked for We Magazine, which was part of Playboy at the time, and we went to a Playmate of the Year presentation at the mansion. I think that was in the 80s, sometime in the 80s. She has a better memory than I do. And then the last time, second and last time, was for an article or an interview I had done with Jimmy Kimmel and Adam Carolla. They were on a show called The Man Show. The Man Show, which used to be on Comedy Central.
Yep.
Yeah, and this was before Jimmy got his, late night talk show and all that. So we had done an interview with them for the show. So Comedy Central, in conjunction with Playboy, put on a huge party at the mansion, which I went to, and I took Chuck, my stepdad, and his buddy Ernie, and my two brothers-in-law, David and Michael, and we had a great night at the mansion, and saw Hef again. Janet and I talked to Hef back in the '80s at that party, and then I talked to Hef briefly. This is Hugh Hefner at the Corolla Jimmy Kimmel party. And then, as we know since then, Hefner has passed away. Mm-hmm. The mansion has been sold, and it's the end of Playboy, really, as we knew Playboy.
I don't even think the son is CEO anymore, is he? I know he's got some in stake,
no,
but he doesn't call the shots.
Yeah. No, I don't think so. No.
Now, let me go.
But they had a good run.
They did. They absolutely did. And we have to literally give our thanks to Hugh Hefner because he opened up a door that at the time was very risky. Not risque, but risky, and literally laid the foundation for so many other people. Larry Flynt would not have all his 20-plus publications had it not been for Hugh Hefner to break that barrier.
I agree. And I actually read the articles. I actually did. I used to love reading the interviews.
Now,
they had, who's who in there.
Yeah, exactly. And that was the greatest thing. You could read an article that was, say, with Axl Rose, and next time it could be a famous author of some sort. They, like you said, who's who was always wanting to be involved. It didn't matter that it was a men's magazine. A lot of women subscribed to it. I know this.
They did.
From the 80s. I would. Women's had it around their house, and there's always great interviews, especially the time when Hugh was involved. Now, back to your father's case, unless anybody else pops up any more questions here. Let me tell you something real quick. When I was at Loyola Law School, and I was in my criminal procedure class, there was a staged event, and we only knew this afterwards. While the professor, she was giving a lecture, I don't know what it was on, maybe the Fourth Amendment that day, since literally you could probably spend 10 weeks plus on the Fourth Amendment alone with all the exceptions. And someone came in, took her purse, and ran out. And the security guard came in and asked everybody, interviewed literally 75 students, and asked them, what was this person wearing? What were they? And I mean, everything ranged from he was white, he was black, he was wearing a red hoodie, he was wearing a black sweatshirt with a baseball hat, he was wearing jeans, he was wearing slacks, he was wearing a short sleeve shirt, he was wearing a sweatshirt. These eyewitness testimonies varied so much, and then after everybody was interviewed, that person was brought back in, and then the teacher announced, the professor, should I say, announced that this was just what's the proper word? An experiment to prove that eyewitness testimony is really very, you can't really rely on it. It's a terrible form of anything. So I just wanted to throw that out there because I know you would know this, but some people out there who think it's still the best thing that we can rely on. Nowadays, you have technology where you can get a lot of surveillance, but in 1978, you pretty much
No.
had to go on eyewitness testimony as well as physical testimony. Now, let me ask you
Yeah.
this. 16 years, 1978 to 1994, for them to finally bring charges. Why in the heck did it take so long? I mean, were there any breakthroughs in the early 90s that said, okay, now it's time we could prosecute this guy? Because there's only two crimes, folks, for out there listening, that statute of limitations never run out, and that's rape and murder. Other than that, there's always statute of limitations. For instance, if you steal the Mona Lisa after 20 some years, maybe 50, 10 years, whatever, you know what? You're not going to get prosecuted for it. Now, that's internationally. I'm talking about within the nation. But homicide and rape is those will never, unless they're closed, they'll stay open for eons. And so, what do you think, or from what I'm assuming that while the prosecution was getting ready for this trial, that they were interviewing you, and I would hope they would have kept you in the loop, right?
Right. Yes, they did.
What?
I think the problem was, one of the problems was, well, the two problems that come to mind immediately. Number one, the Scottsdale Police Department went with Carpenter from day one. They didn't. I don't think they really seriously ever pursued anybody else. Number two, there were 3 district attorneys during that 16 years in Maricopa County in Arizona. So you'd have, the initial DA who was there during the first stage just felt there still wasn't enough to pin Carpenter, even though Scottsdale felt absolutely sure about it. Then that DA leaves, another one comes in. The case gets, as years go by, it's getting cooler and cooler, nothing really new. And then by the third DA, we're in the late 80s, finally says, okay, I'm going to bring in a couple of new people to start from page one. And the DA brought in Jim Raines and his partner, whose name I will think of in a while. And they started at step one and reopened the whole thing, found photographs of the bloodstains on Carpenter's car that were taken back in 78 that were in a box in the bottom, of the courthouse in Phoenix that had been just, passed aside and things like that. And they finally said, well, it's really now or never. We either pursue it now or this thing's going to be cold. So that's when they finally went for Carpenter after 16 years. But again, pre-DNA testing, they just didn't have enough to sell the jury on.
No.
And I remember sitting on the stand the one day I went on stand, basically just to tell the courtroom the thing about my dad telling me that John Carpenter was becoming a pain in the ass and, he was going to make changes in his life and all that. That was the main thread I added to the whole thing. But I remember looking over at the jury, and they were 100 miles away. I mean, they were so not sold on the prosecution's case. I could see it, and I thought at that time, this is a loser. This is an absolute loser.
Let me ask you a couple things. First of all, he was acquitted, not a hung jury, right?
Yes, acquitted.
Because the reason why that's such a major deal is because now the Fifth Amendment applies, which means double jeopardy. He cannot be tried for the same case twice. If it was a hung jury, then he could have. And even though it was, let's just say 1994, and when did he pass away?
He died in 98. He was 70 years old. Okay. So he lived another 4 years.
So it wasn't that long. Then I was going to say, because if it had gone into the 2000s, then touch DNA would have been so much more readily available. How long did the jury deliberate for?
Yeah, I'm not absolutely sure, Dr. J, but I think it was pretty fast. I think it was a matter of a day or so. I think they had their minds made up before they even went into the jury room to deliberate. God bless Bob Shutt and the prosecution team, but they just didn't have enough. There wasn't enough to sell it. So, when in doubt, as you know, if the glove doesn't fit, you must acquit.
Must acquit. So, Johnny Cochran's favorite line. As a matter of fact,
yeah,
that was one thing that was repeated all throughout the law school, and I went to two for two different degrees. Now, let's talk more about John Carpenter. After he had passed in 1998, did anything come about finding the tripod or any other physical evidence that would link him to the crime?
Nothing. The two main missing items from my dad's apartment in Scottsdale were the tripod, based on, again, photographs of the apartment that my dad had taken, or videos showing, the equipment in there. I mean, there would be people in the shop, but you could see in the background what was there. And this was back in the days, for your listeners, of reel-to-reel video decks and cassette video tapes and cameras. And, it was huge. It wasn't your cell phone. Where you can take great movies now
in 4K
on your cell phone.
That's right.
Oh God, yeah, this was huge. Video cameras and decks and tape and all this stuff. So my dad had taken videos of people over at the apartment, and so in the background the police could see the equipment that he had. So based on that, they know there's a tripod missing, because there were a couple of tripods and they only found one. And then secondly, this photo album my dad collected of photos that he took with the permission of, beautiful women that he met. He collected them. And he was like a kid. He was like 12 years old. That photo album is missing for some reason as well. So those two items were never found again.
That's actually really sad and disgusting. I would hope that something would finally come about, considering this is an open case and it's coming on the 41st anniversary. We do have a question from D-Zombified. It's a great question, too. Do you think, Bob, that there was help in the cover-up? And if so, what kind of help and from where?
No, I don't think there was a cover-up. I think the problem from day one was that the murder happened in Scottsdale. And Scottsdale, Arizona, in 1978, averaged 2 murders a year.
Wow.
They were ill-prepared. They were just overwhelmed. And then the whole celebrity factor, the fact that, news organizations are sending reporters in to report on the dead celebrity, it just compounded this whole thing. Scottsdale Police Department was in over their heads from day one. They just didn't know. It was like a tsunami hitting Scottsdale. And they still talk about it as the most famous case they've ever had in Scottsdale. So I don't really think there was a cover-up. I think it just happened in the wrong place at the wrong time. Maybe if it had been Los Angeles County, we would have stood a chance of it being solved and prosecuted. But Scottsdale, Arizona in 1978, no way.
And you actually touched upon something I wanted to mention, because when someone of this stature, a celebrity, is murdered, not just passing away, but murdered, there is immense pressure from fans, from people he worked with, because a celebrity it's not just that one person that's making money. The studios are making money. Everybody related, the production companies. There's that one person generates so much revenue for so many people that there's great interest. The family, of course, needs closure, and of course wants to know what the heck happened to someone who could have lived literally double the age. And
Yeah.
so I would imagine, and like you said, if they were very ill equipped in Scottsdale, averaging 2 murders a year, and I can't
Yeah.
even fathom what their clearance rate was, meaning of how many they'd closed. But
Right.
again, I'm thinking, this is my personal feeling, and I want to get your opinion on this. Do you think the reason why, even though it was 16 years after that John Carpenter was brought to trial, with shoddy evidence from the prosecution, with the risk that if he is acquitted, that they can't bring him to trial again, was literally to show you, the rest of your family, and all the other fans of your father that, hey, look, we haven't forgotten. Yes, it's 16 years later, and we are still trying to prosecute somebody. Is that what you think? The reason why?
To be honest with you, no. No. I think it was just because they had that third district attorney in there who said, this is really now or never, and said we got to go for it. We just have to roll the dice and try it, with the best that we've got and the best we can do. And otherwise, it would still be dormant. But at least they gave it the one try. But no, I don't think they had any concern about family or his fans or anything. No.
Let me ask you this. We got, real quick, I just want to tell you, Bob, we got about 10 minutes left before we have to get off, and I am going to reserve some time for you to plug in all of your books and everything in before we go.
Okay.
And so after I ask this, take it anywhere you want. Since John Carpenter's trial, and for those who caught in late, mind you, it's not John Carpenter, the director, it's of Sony Home Videos, or Home Studios.
Yes.
Have you been able, through your own investigation, especially in writing books, talking to people, keeping the memory of your father alive, and so on and so forth, have you been able to uncover anything since then?
I have not. No. I wish I could. I've talked to people. I've talked to, again, like I said, Dennis Borkenhagen from Scottsdale Police Department, back in 2015. But I haven't come up with anything new at all. It's been, to give him another plug, it's been John Hook, who was the last person to go through all the material, all the boxes of stuff, and he did share information with me, and but even his investigation was limited.
Now, Dezombified has a comment I want to read to you. He says, there is a study that says Arizona is the most corrupt state in the U.S. according to KTAR News. What do you think about that?
Well, I don't know enough about Arizona. I don't know enough about the politics outside of the famous politicians that we see on the news all the time. And so I can't really comment on that. I do, just based on daily news events where you'll see wild things happen in Los Angeles every day. So I shouldn't really talk, but you'll see events in Arizona, and they still do have there is kind of a Wild West mentality there still. But there's a Wild West mentality out here in LA too. I mean, we're just like anything can happen, and you see it on the news at night.
Yeah, and desensitized at that, actually.
Yeah. I mean, just crazy things happening. But that's LA. You turn on Eyewitness News every night, and there's a car chase. The police are chasing someone for 4 hours. So I can't really. I'm not downgrading Arizona at all. I like Arizona. I think it's a beautiful state, but I just don't know enough about the inner workings,
And Scottsdale is
from
actually really pretty because it's from.
It is.
I have family that lives there, and the unofficial name is the Beverly Hills of Arizona.
Oh, absolutely. It's a beautiful, beautiful town. Yeah.
Now, we have about 5 minutes left, Bob, and I know we can go on for literally more hours, and that's why I definitely want to have you back. But since we are short on time, I wanted to basically turn the tables on you and say, what other thoughts or ideas or anything that we haven't covered because we've been going with listener questions, comments, and my own questions that you would like to say before we get into plugging in your information about your books, etc., that you think is relevant people should know?
Well, I mean, just generally from my life, I'm really happy I lived when I did. I wish I could have been with my dad longer. I was only 27 when he was killed, and of course I have two younger sisters who were just in their teens when he was killed, and I know they miss him a lot. So I guess I wish I could talk to him now. He would be 90, Dr. J, 90. And just being an adult now, having conversations that I couldn't have with him back then because I was still kind of intimidated and in awe a bit, because here was a guy from a small town in Connecticut who came out to L.A., became a radio star out here, and then he started acting, and then he gets on a big hit series. What the hell am I, little Bobby, this punk, going to tell my dad, that he hasn't already done or known about? Whereas now, with all these years later, I've got a little bit life experience. I think I could talk to more on an even plane than I did back then. So I guess I miss that the most. But I've also been blessed with the greatest, and I hate this term, but stepfather, because he's really like a father to me, Chuck, who I have learned so much from. And of course, I've known him much longer than I've known my own dad. And I've just learned so much, and so I'm very blessed in having this great stepdad in my life. Very lucky.
And you actually mentioned the fact that he went with you to Scottsdale to talk to the DA. So that sounds like an amazing stepfather. Now, we have two comments. It's actually one, and someone agrees with it in a question. Dezombified says he's a good son, meaning you. And Pam Brettenberg says, yes, he is. I just thought you should know that. And the question, it's two parts technically, is also from Dezombified. Has he ever tried to reach out to any president since then, and would he try now?
I'm sorry, to reach out to who?
President. Any president.
President?
Yes.
Me?
Yeah.
Reach out as what?
As a victim,
I'm a lowly... Oh, no. No, I'm just a lowly citizen of the United States. No, there's no reason for anybody in the U.S. government to take a look at this case. It's no.
Well, I would think that all the darn fans, I've seen this life cut short. You were around at that time. This is actually a year before I was even born. I would think there were vigils literally across the entire United States. This probably, and correct me if I'm wrong, was in the news for a long time.
Yeah, it was. It was just by virtue of Hogan's Heroes being, such a big hit TV show.
Now, if there's any, since we are down to, before I ask you to plug in any information, if you have a final statement for all the listeners and viewers on YouTube, and remember, global listeners, what would you say to them all?
Wow, just real corny stuff like enjoy each day, live each day to its fullest, treat people as you would want to be treated. I don't care how, if they're the president of the United States or someone, carrying your luggage. It doesn't matter. We're all in this together, and you need a little music behind me, Dr. J. It's getting corny, but, it really treat each other with some respect and try to get through all of this together and not fight each other, but help each other.
Amen, and I agree. We do need to be closer. And as a matter of fact, Zombified has another comment for you. He says in capital letters that you are not a lowly, and this was a high-profile case. And I definitely agree with Zombified. Absolutely. I mean, I know you're being humble, but the fact that you're keeping your father's memory alive and still trying to get this solved is something to look forward to. It's very good hope. Bob, it's been truly an amazing conversation. I want to give you time to plug in everything on air, and then please hang by after so I could chat with you real quick. So let's talk about where people can buy your books, the titles of them, any website you have. The floor is yours, my friend.
Oh, great. Yeah. I've had a great time, Dr. J. I'm sorry about the technical difficulties earlier, but I'm glad it got straightened out. I just want to mention just a couple of books. I have co-authored 10 books, and I want to mention just a couple of people. There's Christopher Fryer, who I've written. We did the first book on Jack Nicholson, the actor. We were punks. We were going to college. And it's a whole long story, which I won't tell, but we have a book out about Jack Nicholson. Bruce Stern, who is another contemporary of Nicholson's, who is fascinating. And I had the great pleasure of sitting down with Tom Mankiewicz, a writer-director, who is part of the Hollywood royalty Mankiewicz family. His dad was Joe, who directed, All About Eve and Cleopatra and all these big films. And I got to talk with Tom, who has since passed away, and we put a book together as well, My Life as a Mankiewicz. And then this book that you mentioned earlier for me, Hollywood Plateau, which is all of these books are available on Amazon, of course. But Hollywood Plateau has been fun. It's really 40 years of my getting to meet interesting people in show business and art and athletics and music, and it's kind of the best of interviews and articles I've done with on my own and with other people like Dave Diamond, Christopher Fryer, and Kel O'Connell and people like that. So, but all of these are on Amazon. I have a little author page, Robert David Crane, on Amazon. You can read more about them, and yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Like I said, the honor is all ours, and I want to thank you for joining us, and we'll definitely do this again. Let me give some shout-outs to all the fine people that are in the chat. Lars Saturn, thank you, dear friend, for being here and being on the show regularly. We have my social media manager, who's also my moderator, Pam Brettenberg, and make sure you check out her website, UnitedTruthSeekers.com. Carmen Smith, Mario Heat, Karsten Bauer. Let's see who else. Dezombified. And there's more. Slap Happy One. And let's see who else we got here. David Diamond. Mike Negus. I hope I said that properly. Mike, please correct me at some point if it's Negus or Negus. I don't want to keep mispronouncing that. I believe I said Dezombified, unless I resaid that again. And who else we got here? I haven't even gotten to the two that you know. Alan A. Nakamura. Thank you, Alan, for your Patreon. I appreciate that. David Diamond. Willow Table. Janet L. Spiegel. And
fine publicist.
Yeah. You were mentioning that. And David Lopez. Yes, thank you, David, for always being there. A lot of times I see you are the first. And let's see here. Russell Grant. I want to thank Russell Grant as well. And who else? A lot of chat going on.
John Cerny.
John Cerny,
fabulous, large-scale artist who has a new piece in Marfa, Texas about the movie Giant with James Dean.
And you know what? Marfa
he's a genius.
Yes, yes, I would actually love to talk to him because you know, Marfa, there's a lot to talk about there. We also have
Oh yeah.
Third Phase of Moon, as I mentioned, folks, one of the largest UFO YouTube channels. I've known the Cousins brothers for 7 years. Fantastic guys. Make sure you check out their channel. Jax Scorpio, and let's see who else did I meet. Pyramid 7, and let's see if there's anybody else that I didn't mention. Of course, you said John Cerny. He's popped up here.
Eric and Becky Prowl in Spokane. They're listening right now.
And we also have Rolf Pfeiffer Muller, or Mueller, I hope I said that properly. And let's see if there's anybody else. I believe these are all the people in this chat. And of course, halidiumlabs.com. Thank you, Halidium Labs. And I did get your email too. And I will talk to you soon. Same to you, Lars. And I will call you both. Also, I want to thank Joe Montaldo, station owner of UPRN 107.7 New Orleans, Louisiana, with all the global affiliates, including iHeartMedia, for carrying this show. We also want to thank JC, Deprogrammed Radio Network, out of the United Kingdom, with their terrestrial affiliates in London, Leeds, and wherever else they have them in the UK and EU. I also want to thank, I mentioned Pam, of course, Josh Teres, who is my assistant producer, and also I've given him another title since he does so much, more than just assistant producer. I should probably say assistant, but technically almost VP of operations. I think that's a more adequate title to give him. And literally, folks, the most important people I have to thank are you, the listeners. This show would not be here. This channel, the YouTube channel, would not be here if it wasn't for you. And folks, keep in mind, if you paid attention to what I did Saturday, when I gave my own hour-long spiel, talking about my NDE and why life flashes before your eyes before you die out of personal experience, and of course got a chance to interact with all you fine listeners. You're going to see more of that. Of course, we have guests on, but thanks to a nice push from Third Phase of Moon to get me to do this, you will see more videos of that. That way you guys will have more content to be able to participate as we do these live streams that are not going to be on a traditional guest show on air. So keep that in mind, folks. All you have to do is pay attention to the YouTube channel for those videos, and when it comes to guest shows, check out the website, which is, of course, the name of the show, Dr. J Radio Live. drjradiolive.com is the website. Every single social media outlet is just like the YouTube channel, at DRJ Radio Live. If you could think of it, Instagram, Twitter, Flickr, Tumblr, Minds, BitTube, whatever, it's at DRJ Radio Live. I believe I thanked everybody. Let me just say one more thing. Some of you folks were asking about paranormal. What's the show about? I mentioned that today we're talking about murder in Hollywood, Tinseltown, celebrity being murdered. Tomorrow we have Dr. Turi coming back. If you recall, the last 2 times he was on, he gave some predictions. One of them, he gave a particular date and said there would be an earthquake over 6.0. There was not one on that day. There was 2. So tomorrow he will be back and he's going to be talking about his predictions, alien agenda, alien abductions, and all the fine stuff. So from now until then, folks, figure out what you want to ask him, and by all means, I'll ask him for you. With that being said, folks, now we are officially 8 minutes past the time we should have finished, but that's okay because we got a little bit of a late start, and I have to say now we are signing off.